I recently finished this Very Easy Vogue 9367 jacket pattern. This has 3 views and I've sewn the longest length, view C, in an extra small. I've made this out of a gabardine fabric I found while I was visiting Austin Creative Reused. Then I found this gunmetal hardware online. To start, I'm going to be putting the darts into the back pieces, starting at the raw edge and sewing to the point. Once the dart is sewn, I knot the loose threads at the point of the dart to keep the stitch in place. The darts are pressed towards the center back of the jacket. The back pieces are right sides together and will be stitched from the neckline to the vent. Here's the main side of the back of the jacket. Since this jacket is unlined, I used the bias bound seam finish, also known as the Hong Kong finish, to clean up the raw edges of the seams. To do this method, I have bias taped right sides together against the main side of the fabric. The shorter folded edge of the bias tape is facing the raw edge of the fabric, stitching along the first groove of the unfolded edge to secure in place. Once that's stitched, the longer folded edge folds to the back, covering the stitching. I'm pinning in place with the pins facing the main side. After that, I'll be stitching in the ditch where the 2 fabrics meet to secure the bottom folded edge. Working with the vent on the back of the jacket, both vent pieces are pressed toward the main left side of the jacket. The vent will be sewn in place along the stitching line from the main side. On the inside, the stitching line stops before the top vent edge, which is then folded back. Here you can see from the main side the vent stitched in place. Moving on to the shoulders, I've serged the raw edges since the shoulders will be concealed by the facing on the jacket. Once those are sewn, I press the seams open. Next step, I've got pockets right side facing against the front and back pieces of the jacket. Those will be sewn and then the seam allowance is pressed towards the pocket. Next would be sewing the side seams and the pockets. I actually started with just the side seams, leaving the pockets unsewn. I'm going to be adding bias tape to the side seam allowances. Once that's finished, I'm putting my pockets right sides together, matching the notches, and I'll be sewing along the raw edge. To finish off the pockets, I'm using extra wide bias tape. I'll be sewing that along the stitch line of the pockets. Working only from the back side of the jacket, I'll be adding a notch close to but not through the stitch line above and below the pockets. The front of the jacket will not be notched out. This will allow the pockets to press easily to the front. Along the notch, I'm adding Fray Check to help keep the fabric intact. After the extra wide bias tape has been sewn on the pocket seam line, I'm trimming down the excess fabric before I can turn the folded edge of the bias tape to the back of the pocket. I've got my undercollar pieces sewn together and I'm placing that right sides together against the upper collar. The undercollar will stretch to fit the upper collar. This difference in sizes will allow the pieces to lay flat once flipped to the right side. Once the collar pieces are sewn together, I'm clipping the corners. The seam allowance will be pressed towards the undercollar, and from the main side of the fabric, the collar will be understitched onto the undercollar close to the seam line. Then I finish the collar off with top stitching and a basting stitch on the bottom edge. To sew the collar onto the jacket, I have the undercollar facing the back main side of the jacket. Matching the middle and shoulder notches, there's one notch after the shoulder notch and a circle at the end where the edge of the collar will meet. To make the collar fit, I've made several notches into the jacket edge so it can stretch to fit the collar. Pinning these layers together took a little bit of finessing. To conceal the collar edge, I have the jacket facing ready to go. I've finished the raw edge of the facing with extra wide bias tape. I've also added a Kylie in the machine garment tag and a little loop for hanging the jacket to the middle of the neckline. The facing in the jacket will be sewn right sides together. I've taken the top edge of the sleeve and added a basting stitch to the area between the notches that will be gathered. And then I'll be finishing the sleeves right sides together with bias bound seams. Once the sleeves are finished, I flip those to the right side and pin right sides together from the inside of the jacket. To conceal the sleeve seam line, I'll be using extra wide bias tape. I also finished off the bottom of the hem of the sleeve with bias tape before I folded it under once. And then with the bottom hem of the jacket, I used the extra wide bias tape to match the facing edge. For my top stitching, I worked from the main side of the fabric with the tan thread through my needle and the black thread in the bobbin. This way the tan stitching matches the front main side and the black stitching blends into the black bias tape. The fabric portion of the belt is placed right sides together and the raw edges are sewn. Once that's sewn together, I flipped it to the right side, pressed it, and top stitched the edges. After that, the slider is slipped through the open end of the belt and sewn down. Lastly, I just have to make buttonholes and sew on the buttons. Before I open the buttonholes, I use Fray Check to stabilize the stitching, and my favorite Clover buttonhole cutter to open the buttonholes.